Alright, so today I'm with Ketchup, who's a veteran competitive Mortal Kombat player, who is now a content creator with his brother Mustard. So together they do YouTube guides for games such as Soul Calibur, Dragon Ball Fighter Z, Mortal Kombat, of course, a lot of it, games like Doom, also caster for several games. Such as, well, Quake Champions, which is how I got to know you. So you've been casting Quake Champions. You started as early as the Sacrifice days, so around the QuakeCon 2017. And you've been all the way with us until the last tournament, so the last LAN tournament we've had, which was DreamHack Winter 2018. So how are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's a day off, finally. As rare as they come, I finally got a day off, so I've got some time to kind of sit down with you and have a bit of a chat. Thanks for getting me on the show. I've been watching it for a bit. You know, you got some fair old, really decent both players and commentators on board, so it's kind of nice to be on board as well, to kind of be within those ranks, I suppose. But yeah, I'm excited to have a good old chinwag, really.
All right, perfect. So the question that I always start with, as you probably know, is the origin of the username. So like this is honestly, like, out of all the people I've interviewed, you're the person with whom I've always been the most curious regarding the username. I feel like I'm probably not the only one telling you something like this. So your name Ketchup, where does it come from?
So this is it's a story that I have to explain a lot more to like, I guess, non-fighting game background people. Like in the FGC, it's more of like a common knowledge thing, and then as I kind of go into other games and esports, it becomes something I just have to explain a lot more. So it's not because Mustard, my brother, and myself just wanted a gimmick. It's not because we like the sources, or they were just matching nicknames. It's actually a Mortal Kombat thing. You know what? Actually, I've just realised it's the perfect time. So I didn't rehearse this, I promise. But this dude right here, Sector from Mortal Kombat, has always been my favorite video game character. Because my first serious video game, at a young age, granted too young to be playing it, but my mum didn't know what she bought us, bless her, was Mortal Kombat 3. It was a game that Mustard and myself both played, and we just fell in love with it, and it kind of really sparked our interest for gaming in general on the Super Nintendo. And Mortal Kombat 3, Sarex and Sector, the yellow and red robot characters, were our favorite characters, and they went the longest in development without having real names. Right before release, their nicknames were Ketchup and Mustard because they were yellow and red. So because we went into, fast forward the clocks to 2011 when Mortal Kombat 9 comes out and Sarex and Sector are playable again, throughout a lifetime of growing up, they remained our favorite characters. They were the characters that we played the most in Mortal Kombat. And because Mortal Kombat 3 is our first and favorite Mortal Kombat game, our gamer tags are basically just a homage to Mortal Kombat 3, which was our first game, and it was the game that really changed everything for us. And it got us wanting to compete and got us wanting to play, Mortal Kombat more and all that stuff. And we kind of owe everything to it. So it's a multi-layered little Easter egg, I suppose, to the game that started everything. And that's the TLDR of it.
Awesome. So tell me more about your history with gaming. So more... What was your very first game? Like, what was your impression with gaming at first? And also, one thing I'm really curious about is the fact that some of your main games are Mortal Kombat and Doom. And so, how was it with your parents? Like, with your enjoyment as a kid? Like, how did you manage to play those games? What was their... I don't know. Like, I'm really curious about all this. So yeah, tell me about your history with gaming.
My history with gaming goes way back. Obviously, I'm 26 now, so I kind of grew up in what I would always call like the golden age of games, where like my first ever console was an Amiga, which was it's like a variation of the Commodore 64. I'm pretty sure it was something similar, but the games were on floppy disks, and the games came with a little code book, and you had to program it and stuff. The Amiga was our first console, and I kind of grew up with games watching my mum play games that she really enjoyed, because I was really young. I was no good at them, but I enjoyed them. But she used to play games like Rodland, which is this really weird Japanese platformer puzzle game. And she also played Super Frog, which was a Team 17 game long before Worms came out. Super Frog was an adventure game they played where you play this little frog superhero platformer guy. And we used to enjoy watching her play because she would always get further than we could. Things like Rainbow Island and Adam's Family on Amiga as well. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles before the one on the NES. I think it might have been a port of it or something. I can't remember how they changed it around. But then we got into the NES, and that's kind of where we got into Nintendo. And we were very much Nintendo people growing up. So it was NES, Super Mario Brothers with the Duck Hunt, which everyone got, I think, at that age for Christmas. Blaster Master is one of my favorite games of all time. It's like the greatest game on the NES, in my opinion. It's absolutely fantastic. That Sunsoft, did a good job for music, graphics, gameplay. It's a wicked game. And then Super Nintendo is where things changed for us, really. And that is actually where we kind of got introduced to Mortal Kombat. As like I said before, Mortal Kombat 3 was our first game. Our mum didn't go out to buy us Mortal Kombat. I think she bought it off our cousin or something. I think our cousin had bought a Nintendo 64 and didn't need his SNES anymore, so she bought it off him as a Christmas present and just bought all the games that came with it. Mortal Kombat was just one of them. And if you're a parent back then and they come in little cartridges and you might not even have the instruction book, there's no online, there's no internet, there was probably no way that you could actually tell what game was what, judging by just the box, right? Because Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo, it's just a logo. You have no idea of knowing just how gratuitously violent the game was at the time. And I mean, fun fact about that, you said, how did our parents feel? I actually felt pretty uncomfortable at a tiny young age as well. I still genuinely remember the very first fatality that was ever done against me. And it was Sindel, the female character with the long hair. She had a fatality in Mortal Kombat 3 where she wrapped her hair around you and rapidly pulled it away. And you started spinning on the spot. And all these arms and legs were flying out. And then you kind of just, turned to mush on the floor. And that was a fatality. I had no idea that fatalities existed. I didn't know what they were. I just lost to AI Sindel. The screen went dark. That happened. I was like 5, 6, I guess. It upset me so much that I turned the console off, took the game out, ran out my house, and sat on the swing set for about half an hour, like taking in what I'd just seen. I was like, I'd never seen anything so shocking in any game or film ever, But the next day I put it back in and I started playing again to see if I could find more, because I was like, that was actually pretty cool, So yeah, it was just one of those things where the shock value of Mortal Kombat was, I think even when I was a kid though, I could tell that it's not real. I could tell that it was, the characters are like these weird little, they look like, my favorite character looked like a Power Ranger, these ninjas are in it, like these crazy, monster dudes are in it. And I could tell very much that it's not real life. Like I could very easily differentiate it, which I think is why it didn't affect me in that way. I could tell, very easily that there was a difference there. And then, yeah, that's kind of where we started with Mortal Kombat. And Doom is my dad, actually. I have to owe to that. My first ever Doom was Doom 64 for the Nintendo 64. Again, it scared me a great deal because I think that was done by Midway back in the day, and they actually went into they actually took it in more of a horror direction. There wasn't really any music. It was more ambient noises. The demons sounded a lot spookier. The setting in general, the lighting was a lot darker. And it was actually, I guess, a little bit more Lovecraftian than the original Dooms as well. So they all kind of pieced together into what was a pretty scary experience, but I loved it. But I was admittedly pretty scared to play it, and I used to watch my dad play it all the time. He used to it was just too hard for me as well at a young age. My dad played through the entirety of Doom, couldn't beat the final level, the Absolution, when you've got to shut all the gates, didn't know how to get the secret levels, so he didn't have the demon keys. And then he was really proud of himself one day because he figured out the big cheat that gives you infinite ammo, infinite weapons, max health, all that stuff. And he finally beat it, and that was the first little bit of cheating I think I experienced in games as well. But basically, I owe my entire gaming background to, I guess family members growing up playing fighting games with my brother Mustard, my older brother Luke, and my cousin. My cousin played fighting games a great deal. We grew up playing Mortal Kombat, some of the Tekkens. Soul Calibur was a big one. Soul Calibur 2 was one of our most played games. And that's pretty much it. It just kind of continued growing up. But the big thing though is console. That really is the big thing, and that's what I kind of have to explain to people when it comes to Quake Champions. Is I was by all accounts a new guy to competitive Quake, and I still feel like a new guy, even though I've been with the game since friends and family tests. I still feel like almost uninitiated in a respect, because compared to the Quake legends that have been around with it for almost as long as I've been alive, it's 2 years or 2.5 years is nothing. compared to that. So it's like it's kind of crazy, really. But my background was console because I grew up in a household with 2 other brothers, and my cousins. I had 2 cousins as well that I used to play games with. And if you're our age and you're growing up in a house, you're not going to have a PC in the house. You're going to have a console that everyone shares, because a console, you can have controllers that you plug in, local multiplayer. That was way more effective for our parents to go, well, let's, and when I say parents, actually, it was a separate household. So my dad and my mum were separated. So we used to go to my dad's to play N64, and we'd come home and play Super Nintendo or whatever at home until we got a PS1 for Christmas, I think, way later. So it was, we were always surrounded by console backgrounds because we played it together, basically. My first Quake was Quake 1 on the N64. I was really excited to play it because I'd heard people saying, hey, it's just like Doom. And I love Doom 64. So I played Quake 1 on the N64 and loved it as well. Never had the chance to play Quake 2 when I was really young because, the shops in town just didn't have it, basically. And it kind of just grew from there. I think that's why Doom and Mortal Kombat have always been my 2 favorite games, because they were the 2 games I played the most at a young age. I guess it just so happens that they were violent. I really didn't play them because of that. It's just I happened to have the most fun with them, and I still happen to have the most fun with those 2 games as well to this day. So yeah, that's a very long breakdown of some of my history with games. I guess there's way more, but we haven't got time.
So one thing I'm curious about now is regarding your parents. So as you said, both of them were gamers. So how did they react to your development as a gamer, to you like becoming a competitive gamer and then content creator, caster? So yeah, how did they see all this? Were they more encouraging than most people usually are with this?
This is a bit of a weird one, really, because I actually wouldn't say that either of my parents were actually like gamers. It's just, I think they must have bought. It was only 1 console each. My only memories of actually, I was inspired to play games more because I would watch my mum play the Amiga, and it made me want to play the Amiga more. And I would watch my dad play like Turok or Doom, and it made me want to play those games. But they were actually kind of the only games they played. I can only assume what happened was that they would buy it for us for Christmas, and they'd see it, and they'd be bored or something after working or getting back from whatever. My dad's a labourer and always has been. So, get back from the construction site or whatever and be like, I think I'm a put Earthworm Jim 3D on. And he just, randomly played it, and it turns out he liked it. But it's a very minimal, actually. Neither of them, I think, were like gamers, but they did play games with us a little bit. And with that came a kind of mixed bag. So my mum has always been really supportive. Like through every walk of life, she supported us through thick and thin, and no matter what. But my dad had a little bit growing up, a little bit of a more, I think, old-fashioned point of view, where because gaming wasn't anywhere near the scale it is now, least of all with competitive and esports and content creation. Like, if you back then in the N64 days, if you wanted to work in games, you pretty much you wanted to become a games creator or a developer, and that's it, because you don't know about any other avenues. So I do understand it, and I always did understand it, that my dad was a little bit more skeptical of us wanting to get into games, mainly because our education was entirely built around games development. So when I went to university, I actually did 3D like level design. I actually have always loved making maps and making levels. I owe a lot of that to in being interested in the idea of custom Quake levels as a kid. Map makers from like Time Splitters and the Far Cry map makers were all really good as well. Any kind of video game, there was a map maker I used to get really interested in. I had loads of fun making these maps, right? So as I kind of grew up and I went into development, I realized that I enjoyed it a great deal, and I kind of wanted to pursue that as maybe a career. I kind of made I messed around with like the Hammer editor, made a Team Fortress map. It was crap, but I made it from start to finish and I was happy with it. And then it was at university, Mustard and I, who have always been together, as a pair. It's kind of like 2 brothers rarely get to go down the same line of work, but we kind of somehow managed to. Decided when we went to university and we started competing as a hobby, and it was only ever a hobby back then, that we much enjoyed the world of events a lot more. And we didn't even know tournaments existed. But once we discovered them, we realized that was kind of like our niche. And that's kind of where we started to go down. So with all this factored in, our mum was really supportive because as long as we were happy, she was happy. And we were definitely happy pursuing a career that we really, really wanted. And my dad was a little bit more concerned about it. He kind of struggled, I think, to see that there was potential. He might have kind of saw that it was just too hard to get a job in the games industry, because it's rare that you'll get a job in the industry anyway. Not only because there's just not a lot of jobs going at once, and also so many people have more expertise than you do. The amount of people that are studying games and education now is huge. So you're always playing the numbers game. He kind of always wanted us to put the controllers down and go outside and start kicking a football around, because that's what everyone else was doing. There was always people our age. Back then, you were mocked if you played games. You were picked on. Obviously, I don't want to get too much into it, but bullying was real in school growing up because you played games, you're a nerd. You've got long hair, you're a massive nerd. Who's this guy? That's just the way it was as a kid my age in like a sort of country town of the UK where there's no real variety, in the kind of people. So if you had long hair as a guy and you played games, you probably were going to be the center of ridicule. It wasn't cool to play games back then. So all that kind of stuff factored in. My dad kind of really wanted to try and push us away for it to try and almost like get a real job. And that's just a parent thing. Like, I don't begrudge him for thinking that. And one of the reasons I don't is because the moment Jake and I actually got our first job in the games industry, we were games testers in 2014. Actually, we worked for Rockstar Games and tested Grand Theft Auto 5 Next Gen for a year before Mortal Kombat X came out. And we were still competing then as well. It was when we had graduated from university and got our first job in the games industry. Be it was an entry-level job, but it was a job nonetheless. Our dad kind of really admitted to us that he was never so happy to be so wrong about something. He completely admitted that he was incorrect to think that. And ultimately, I just don't think he understood the scale of games now. And they'd gotten far bigger than he ever imagined they would, going from playing N64 with us at like 10 to being fully fledged adults working in the game industry where there's basically, hundreds of thousands of jobs worldwide that you can, work your way into because there's now more avenues. He's just as supportive as ever is now because he now understands the path we wanted to go down. So it's been a good experience for us, I have to admit. I know it's not the same for everyone, but when it comes to Mustard and myself, we've had a lot of support, especially in our adult years. I think it's because we've been able to really make something of it, which is so hard to do, especially for someone our age anyway.
So now, going back on the theme of violence in video games, one thing I've been questioning is the fact that video game has never been really respected as a medium. Like as you were talking about, like gamers being like bullied and like seeing this thing as not being like very respectable. Like if you compare it to cinema, like in a way, if you take those games like Mortal Kombat, Doom, like very kind of similar to a Tarantino movie in a way with like all the blood, all the violence. And when you look at like Tarantino is a very respected director, like his movies are like Pulp Fiction, like very looked up to art, and gaming doesn't have that, and So yeah, I'm just like curious about this. So what do you think on this? Do you think gaming could ever be seen as something like more than it is right now, like being seen as really like a form of art or like something more than just games?
I think if you understand the mature media medium, I guess that's a sentence I think I probably just made up on the spot. I'm pretty sure the big thing that I think prevents mainstream media from recognizing a mature rated game as critically acclaimed as something like a Pulp Fiction or a Django Unchained or a Kill Bill. I'm actually a huge fan of Tarantino films, a massive fan of Tarantino's work, because I love horror films. My favorite, some of my actually absolute favorite films are The Thing is my favorite film of all time. Hellraiser is my favorite like horror icon. Pinhead is, in my opinion, the best horror icon in horror history. I love that character and I love those films. But I think that's because I am able to see past the violence of the film and kind of see it as more than what it is. You can kind of see the creativity in there, and that's a big part of that. Actually, I think shares into Mortal Kombat and Doom and Quake. Like these games that are super violent, yes, but it matches the art style of the game, and it does match the visual direction the game has gone in. And can you imagine? I can't imagine Quake Champions being as visually appealing if it didn't have the gibs, if it didn't have the violence, because you've got this very Lovecraftian, like old school, very almost like ornate kind of map design and level design, and these really like very, you know, otherworldly, evil, sinister looking characters. If the game didn't have the violence on top of it, it just, in my opinion, it just wouldn't look right. And Doom is one of those things as well. If you've got all these demons, you're literally in hell, which is like the absolute realm of pain and suffering. Of course, there's going to be violence there because it's the direction the game has to go in to feel the way it's supposed to feel. Look at the fatalities in Mortal Kombat, and like, you know, watch any of the trailers right now. Like they just made the Johnny Cage trailer where NetherRealm just revealed Johnny Cage. His fatality in that trailer is it's violent, but it's a hilarious nod to an old school fatality glitch. He's a movie star, so they've got these little sketches in where like he's messing up a fatality and they're having to cut and go again. And it's like, yes, it's violent, but it's really clever. Like the way they've done it is a very, very, very clever way of going about things. But I think the reason the mainstream media don't recognize violence in games the same way as violence in film is because you are the one doing those actions. Because games are associated a lot with young people and children. You know, if a parent thinks of games, they think of Fortnite, they think of League of Legends, Overwatch, whatever free-to-play game is going out right now that has a cartoony background that all the kids are playing. That's kind of what parents associate that with. And then if they were to see a Mortal Kombat trailer or a Doom Eternal trailer, they'll be like, wait, that's on the console that my kid's playing on? Wait, I don't want my kid playing that. Because that's kind of like the same thing, is that if they'd let their kid watch a horror film but not let them play the game, I can only assume it's because they see it as their kid being the one doing the actions. But as long as you can differentiate the difference between reality and fiction, like going all the way back to when I first saw my first fatality in Mortal Kombat 3, it horrified me for like 10 minutes, and then I thought it was hilarious after that, and I just, you know, ended up deliberately losing to the AI to see what else was in the game because I was really curious. I was like, oh man, that was wicked, I'm gonna do it again. And you know, I've never been a particularly violent person, and I play some of the most violent games going. So ultimately, I just think, I don't know if games will ever be considered the exact same as film. I have a great respect for both and always have done, but I think it's because I've grown up watching both of them, and I've always loved horror films, and films that have violence in them are just, it's more of like a, you know, it's more of an experience, really. You don't watch it because you don't watch it because you're, I guess, you don't watch it because you're a psychopath. You watch it because it's something you can't get otherwise. And as long as you know it's not real, sometimes there's just a hilarious entertainment value to it. Like, you know, I don't like shock films. I don't like the kind of films that exist to try and shock you deliberately with no plot. It's got to be an entertaining film as well. If there's no entertainment and it's just boring and violence, then the film sucks. Like, that's why I was never really a fan of Hostel. I don't want to blow up I don't want to blow up random films, but I've seen things like, you know, a Serbian film and Hostel and that, and I thought they're crap. I was like, well, yeah, they're violent and they're shocking, but they're crap films, in my opinion, obviously, because there still needs to be entertainment there, and games and film can still have violence and entertainment too. And as long as you can get the balance of that right, I think you've got a good formula.
So also, like, while staying on the topic of violence, do you think that video games will ever be freed of this image of video games making kids violent? Like, there was a research done recently, I'm not sure, by a big English,
I'm familiar with this too.
I think it was, is it Oxford that did or Cambridge, I'm not sure, like, well, one of the big university in England recently did a study on this, showing that there's no link between violent video games and kids being violent. But I feel like this idea keeps on being present, and you think we'll ever get rid of it?
Truly, I don't think it's ever going to shift. I don't know if it's as bad as it was. I remember growing up, it was pretty much a constant. I don't know whether things are different now, but I definitely know growing up, it was a constant conversation. Was, you know, hey, if you play those games all day, and you'll grow up to be whatever, this and that and this and that. But I can't recall a single person. It all comes down to personal experience, and I think a gross misunderstanding of it as well. That's what a big part of it, in my opinion, is what it comes down to, is not understanding. Because everyone that has those opinions, they don't play games. People that have those opinions, they've never touched a controller or a mouse or a keyboard in their life. So they just see person plays violent product, person does violent act, and that they just connect the dots. But I always find it to be pretty hypocritical, because it would be, if these conversations happen and someone is a fan of violent films, I've heard remarks made where they say, what about films then? It's like, well, they're not real. That's not real. It's like, well, why is it not different for games when it's essentially the same kind of thing? Like I said, the only difference is that you are doing the actions with games and you are watching them being done in film. But I think that there's still a bit of a fine line there. I've never met a single person, and it goes for basically everyone I've ever known. I've never met anyone or experienced it myself, anyone that has played a violent game and has gone out and done something terrible. I think my philosophy has always been, if someone wants to commit a violent act, it's more, I think, the person in question, and anything they do could be used as an example. Because these people do all kinds of things, and video gaming is just one of them. But there's a good chance that they probably don't play violent only games. What if they've also got, I don't know, Fortnite in their collection? Like, I don't know. Everyone has such a vast game library, and there's a good chance that maybe you don't just play violent games. But it's the easiest thing to point a finger to, and I think that ultimately is what it comes down to. Is that the easiest thing for many people is to, I think, to just simply blame video games on something, because it's something that a lot of people don't understand. And if you don't understand it, it's much easier to point the finger at it. That's why I feel, anyway.
Yeah, so one thing that I think about is regarding violence. Like, I see video games more as a catharsis. Like, I mean, I've had situations where I'd be pissed, like, because of, I don't know, like high school or something. I'd get back home and like play good FPS and like virtually kill some people, and then like feel much better about myself, because with all my rage like being expelled into the video game. So yeah, I do feel like that. Yeah, it has actually the opposite effect in a way.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've never actually, like, that's because that's the thing. Like, Mortal Kombat and Doom and Quake are my 3 favorite games, and Turok's up there as well. And pretty much all of my favorite games are violent games. But I've never, under any circumstances, played a game for that reason. I've never been, even when I was a kid, and angsty teenagers, we're all one at some point, where you want to relieve stress and you want to play a game and you want to get that stress out. I've actually never really done that. But I've had a background of, like, playing drums, for example. Like, I sort of grew up playing the drums. And that actually was my stress relief. Video games were always a form of entertainment for me, but I never actually used games as a form of relieving stress, because I would use music and drumming as that. Something super, super physical and, super impactful. That was just the way I operated at a young age, and all the way through college. And right before I went to university, I was playing drums, and that was my escape. But I think I definitely agree with you that there are people out there that will use video games as a form of escapism, because it's like a way of getting frustrations out. And it doesn't even need to be a violent game. It just needs to be something that you can focus on and that you can be entertained by. It could be a racing game. You could get the same satisfaction playing like Flat Out or Demolition Derby, some kind of like aggressive racing game where you've got to like smash into other cars. I get just as much satisfaction out of those kind of games too. Anything that's got like physical contact that are intense and it's like smash, smash, smash. They're the kind of games that also work for that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think everyone's sort of like felt that at some point, and I do think it has a positive effect. Just being able to escape the issues of the real world. That's what games all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, going back to your brother, also one thing I was wondering is, with your brother, were you like more of the co-op style? For example, with my brothers, that's what gaming was like. Either we would watch our big brother like play Super Mario Galaxy, that's what we grew up with, because I'm much younger. Or like we'd play together, like I know some games like Crash Bandicoot, like. With my brothers, we were much more on the co-op side of things. Like, we didn't really like competing against each other. But was it the opposite with Mustard? Like, were you more of the, like, I'm the best, I'm going to destroy you tonight? Like, what was it like?
It's a bit of a sort of mix, I think, for us. Mustard and I, If it was fighting games, it was always 1v1 forever. We had much more enjoyment playing fighting games against each other than we did fighting the AI. We kind of had that unique luxury where even when fighting games didn't have, no fighting games had online at all for years. I think the first fighting game that had online play was Mortal Kombat Deception, which came out in the mid 2000s. And even that was like, you needed a PS2 online connection. Who the hell had that? So it was like, the only way to play fighting games was offline. And if you lived by yourself or were an only child or something, it had to be arcade. And that's fun until you realize that it's much more fun to fight a human opponent. So we were kind of lucky in that respect that we always had someone else to play with. So if it was a fighting game, 100% our enjoyment came from playing against each other. No matter what the fighting game was. If it was Tekken 2, if it was Soul Calibur 2, if it was any of the Mortal Kombats, because we've played every Mortal Kombat ever made at this point. And we always played them against each other. MK3, 2, 1, Mortal Kombat Trilogy 4, like the 3D ones, Deadly Alliance, Deception, Armageddon, you name it, we played it against each other. But any other game at all, it was always co-op, 100%. Like, I'm going to spitball here, I guess, but any racing game would work together. Like, games like Cell Damage, I suppose. Anything that you could team up. If we would do like, Time Splitters, we'd always team up together. If we were playing Perfect Dark, GoldenEye, I think Perfect Dark was, I don't think GoldenEye clearly did. I think you could, but if we played Perfect Dark growing up, we'd always team up. Turok Rage Wars was a huge one. We'd do the 2-player trials, and that was like a great experience. Just playing through the entirety of Turok Rage Wars co-op was awesome. And that kind of just went into 360 and the more modern games as well for PS2. That was always our direction. If it wasn't a fighting game, we wanted to play through it together and co-op to beat it together. Like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance as well was another game that we loved as kids. So 100%, it was a mix. Fighting games 1v1, and then anything else would always team up.
So now going back to fighting games as general. So I come from the FPS community, so I'm not that familiar with it, but I do like following some tournaments here and there. So one thing I'm curious about is the fact that in fighting games, there are tournaments that include multiple fighting games, which is something that we never have in other games such as like MOBAs and FPS. Because in FPS and MOBAs, the tournaments are often organized by the developers or the publishers themselves.
Yes.
So that's why we never see like you'd never see it. Like we've never seen a like big tournament with like so many games together. And do you think that is something that could happen? Like I don't like imagine a big FPS tournament with like all the major FPSs at the same time. Do you think that could happen, or do you think it's something that will always like stay reserved to the fighting game community?
I feel the reason it's different in the fighting game community is because it's just the way the culture has been, and it's the way the tournaments have always been since tournaments began. Pretty much, it was always like, even when you had tournaments back in the day at an arcade, you had multiple games there because an arcade had Tekken and Soul Calibur and Street Fighter and Killer Instinct. Like, arcades had multiple games and people played those multiple games. And if they did a tournament day, they might try and do tournaments for multiple games. And that's kind of how it started. I feel like when it comes to like the more mainstream esports, as long as tournaments are being done and backed by the publisher all the way, and those publishers are very protective of their game, I don't think we'll almost ever see that outside of FGC, because I can't see any publisher wanting to actively promote any other game but their own at an event that they're putting money into and stuff like that is what I assume personally. But the reason it happens with fighting games, I guess, is just because that's just the way it's always been. And even with these tournaments, and I guess for those unaware of how things go, and let me give you a quick rundown of how fighting game tournaments work. So you have X amount of days for the weekend. It will traditionally be a 3-day event, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sometimes it's Saturday, Sunday, depending on the amount of games or the scale of the event. If it's smaller, you have less days. But for the most part, you have an entire venue booked out, like a ballroom or a hotel, or in Evo's case, they now have like the Mandalay Bay Arena for tournament day, and they have a convention center for the start of the day. And you have X amount of consoles that will be allocated from different sources. It might come from different companies. It might come from Sony themselves, providing them, who knows. And you have all of the games on these consoles, and you allocate X amount of games to X amount of systems, and you have many different tournaments going on at once. So, you know, you have Street Fighter 5 and Tekken 7 going on at the same time. And if someone's entering both games, their group stage will be maybe first thing in the morning for Tekken 7, and then they'll have it set so it's like afternoon for Street Fighter 5, so they can get involved in both of them. And then you'll finish your Tekken matches and then go over to the other side of the room where Street Fighter's going on, and then your pool's about to start for that. The pool, I mean, a group stage will start for that. And it really is the Wild West, man. Like there's so many games and tournaments going on at the same time. But these tournaments, Capcom Pro Tour, Tekken World Tour, last year it was the Injustice Pro Series, the Dragon Ball Fighters World Tour, like the Arc System Revo Tour. I can't remember the name of it, but the Arc System Works Tour thing they're doing for those kind of games too. They're all, most of the mainstream large scale tournaments are backed in some way. If a Tekken 7 tournament is going on at a big event, it's probably Tekken World Tour. Capcom Pro Tour is the same. Injustice Pro Series, it was the same thing last year too, because they are supporting that specific tournament, and that's it. They might be giving it a pot bonus, you know, they might be giving it some cash for whoever wins it, like 10, maybe 20,000. And if you win or place high in the tournament, you'll earn points. And the year-long series for these leagues, for these different games, will put all of these different grassroots tournaments, none of which are being organized by the publisher, by the way. It's always community. They have support from the publisher, but it's 100% done by the community around different parts of the world. And these different tournaments have different ranking events. And then by going around the world and winning these tournaments or placing in the top 8, top 16, top 32, whatever allocates points, by the end of the year, like the top X amount of players that have got all these points by winning and placing get invited to a final, which then is organized by the publisher. Like the finals tend to be publisher done. Everything else is done by the community. And that's the difference, is that the people that started competing and started out as competitors playing in like comic book stores or basements or sports halls, whatever venue they can to fit the amount of consoles in they want, it's kind of like evolved over the years. So now we have larger venues, larger events, more people. Like it's grown from strength to strength, but the whole thing has been a community feel. And I think that's the distinct difference, is that it's so ridiculously homegrown. But that's why I would always compare it to Quake, always, because Quake's entire legacy is the Quake cons, the tournaments that the community do themselves. Like, I mean, how long has 125 FPS been going on? Like, the whole thing is done by the community because that's what they love to do. And if they wanted to do a tournament, then they'd bloody make a tournament happen. And everyone knows each other. You'd have to go on LAN and do these open bracket tournaments. It actually is exactly the same as fighting games. Like, you know, QuakeCon, when you'd go and play, and you know, like the open bracket tournaments there. It's like, it's the exact same format. Anyone can play, anyone can get involved, and you could enter your first tournament and the first person you're fighting in the group stage is cooler. That's just the way it is. You know, you can't get that from most other games, but that's where I've always loved Quake as a competitive title, is that there is such a similarity between Quake and the FGC. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also, one thing like you've noticed, of course, as well, is the fact that over the past years, I think it's probably started with Counter-Strike, but we've been shifting more and more away from 1v1 FPSs. Because like back then, like the main FPS esports was Quake, of course, with Quake 3 for a very long time, and then like Counter-Strike arrived, and that switched over to team FPS games. And now, like when you look at pretty much every FPS esports, like Overwatch, CS:GO, Rainbow Six, like they're all games very centered around the team aspects. And like apart from Quake Champions, we don't really have any esports 1v1 games anymore. Do you think that could come back? And like, what do you think explains this shift over to the team aspect in terms of FPS?
I've always felt like there is, to the average gamer or the everyday gamer, there's more of an attraction to team modes. Some people think that 1v1 takes more skill. Some people think teams take more skill. I've always been in the mindset that I believe 1 versus 1 is more impressive. for the simple reason of, and I by all means, I don't want to sound controversial here. I 100% respect team games, and I understand completely why people would prefer those and why they would have their own opinions. They think that team games are more impressive. They just tick different boxes. But I just think that in 1v1, there is no one to blame but yourself if you lose. Simply put, like at the end of the day, in a 1v1 game, you are your own worst enemy in that regard. You have to play well. You can maybe get lucky and your opponent is playing bad, but again, that's on them and they're in the same boat. So I've always had way more of an attraction to 1v1 games. I'm crap at duels in Quake. I'll be the first person to admit it. I'm garbage at duels, but I love duels. Like I love watching them for sure. I can watch it and I know what's going on. I know what I'm looking at. That's why I'm comfortable commentating it. But if you were to put me against Rafa, I wouldn't even touch him. I probably wouldn't even get a single champion off him because I'm just not a competitive dueler, and I never have been. And because I'm a full-time commentator, I never will be. But that doesn't mean I don't have just this crazy amount of appreciation for it, because I can acknowledge just how much effort and skill and awareness goes into it. Quake is one of the hardest games I've ever played in my life, as someone who didn't grow up with competitive Quake, because the amount you have to learn is really intimidating. And I think that reason is why we don't see a lot of people playing Quake. It is so hard to learn the game, because before you've even fired your first shot, you've got to know how to move. You've got to learn the movement tricks. You at least have to learn how to strafe jump, get that little circle jump for the speed, or any of the trick jumps that exist on the maps. Not even factoring in like the different champion movements and stuff, the different movement speeds. Like there's so much knowledge that you need to become even remotely competent at the game. And the main game mode that is played competitively is 1 versus 1, where you have to collect all of this knowledge and all of this skill and put it into perfect precision. Otherwise, if the guy's better than you, you're not going to win. And it's daunting and it's hard work. And I love it. And many people love it. Quake players love it. And Quake players love the skill. But I think that's why the outside audience are intimidated by it, because there is no way you can be carried. You can't have a bad game and have someone carry you. You can't hope the other guy is going to be bad, because Quake is so hardcore. There's a good chance the person you're against is probably going to be pretty good at least, and will know as much as you need to know to win. So yeah, it's a bit of a funny one. I always feel like every friend I've ever had that I've tried to get into Quake, they've always said the same thing. It's too hard. I don't have time to learn it. And that's a simple thing. Everyone thinks that it just takes so much work. And again, you have any idea how many times I hear the exact same reason someone can't learn Quake for the same reason they can't learn Tekken, or they can't learn Mortal Kombat, or they can't learn Street Fighter? It's too hard. It takes too much knowledge, and I don't have the time to get good at it. Because everyone thinks that it takes a million years to get good at a 1v1 game like this. And I don't know if that's ever going to change. I think that's just the way it is.
All right. So tell me a bit about your experience casting Quake Champions. So first of all, how did you get into Quake Champions casting?
So I got involved in Quake Champions commentary during the Friends and Family test, before it even got announced, really. It was just being played behind the scenes. Well, it was announced, but obviously it wasn't, no gameplay or anything was seen. It was under strict NDA. But I was involved in the Friends and Family test from an ESL standpoint, because I've been working for ESL UK for nearing 3 years now. It'll be 3 years in April. And because Doom is my favorite game next to Mortal Kombat, I was very heavily involved in the PC Doom community. And this is actually something that a lot of people don't know, is that I was involved in Doom for a while. I made a lot of content for Doom, like a lot of tutorial stuff. You can go on my YouTube and find it easily. I made a bunch of like Doom tips and tricks videos about mostly the demons and some of the gameplay stuff, like the weapons and equipment, like, because my content creation background for Doom came from the fact that I wanted to find content when I was new and it didn't exist. And once I'd played the game for over a year and I, got decent at it, and I got involved in the community that knew the meta for everything else and all that, and I became a lot more, I guess, competitive minded on how to actually play Doom 2016, by the way, Doom 4, how to play that properly. Jahar will kill me if I don't call it Doom 4. It's Doom 4. It's once I figured out how to play it properly, I decided to make those videos myself. And that's where the tips and tricks videos came from. And it gave me a good opportunity to expand my horizons as a video creator, writing scripts, recording commentary, doing the audio for it and everything else. It was a good learning experience. And I did that for ages. And that was actually where I met Tokyo Punch-Out, who a lot of you guys will know now is now the community manager for id on Quake and the id games, basically. So he works for Bethesda as a community manager doing the id games. We actually both started in Doom, and that's how we met. You'll actually, if you ever go back and watch any of my videos, Tokyo Punch-Out was actually in them, in game, some of them, and it was a bit of a small world that we were involved in Doom stuff together. He was running a bunch of the community tournaments, and I was helping him make content for those community tournaments. I would have been commentating community tournaments if I could, but the game didn't have a spectator. Mustard and I actually did an exhibition on PC using Clan Arena, because it was the only way we could get a spectator client in the game, was to do Clan Arena, frag ourselves as fast as possible, and it lets you spectate your team. And that's how we did it. That was the only way we could do it. It was super budget, but it was a means to spectate teams, and we had the two strongest teams on PC, CBF and New Classic. And it was actually a really fun experience. It was the only piece of, I guess, like competitive Doom that ever existed. We just couldn't do more because the game didn't have spectator features. I think they wanted to go down a fun direction more than a competitive direction, because they knew that Quake Champions was coming out, and that was what their focus was going to be. But yeah, Doom gets done and dusted. Everyone starts to move on to Quake, and it just turns out that id Software, they love watching fighting games. And they always have. Duel was, almost directly influenced by King of Fighters. Like the Duel format now, where you go in with a team of 3 characters and they all have 1 life each. In King of Fighters, that's 1 life bar each, and you have to knock them off, and the last person on top of the pyramid wins. Right, the last man standing takes it. There's a lot of fighting game influence they took with the Duel format because they love fighting games, and they see it that kind of way. And they were watching the Tekken 7 UK Championship, which was a tournament series that Mustard and I had kind of put forward to ESL UK, and we collectively executed a promotional Tekken 7 tour with Bandai Namco UK and toured the UK, doing some tournaments, getting the UK in. It was pre-release, so it was the only piece of like real competitive Tekken 7 at the time, because it was an updated build with some new characters and stuff like that. I didn't even know this, but id were watching almost the whole thing, and they really enjoyed it, and they really liked our commentary. And that kind of became from us commentating Tekken at the time, while we waited for Injustice 2 to come out, and doing a bunch of this UK activity. And I was really excited for Quake Champions all the way back then. I was so bad, though. I was so bad, but I loved it, and I was eager to learn and just play and play and play in the friends and family. I'll always remember, I'm pretty sure it was Noctis. No one was searching. I would play it, and I'd be like, "Oh, this Noctis guy is really good," just slapping me around in like an unofficial duel because no one else was searching in a friends and family. Yeah, they basically ended up sending us out to IEM Katowice, where it had a closed playtest session. It was very under lock and key then. But they basically wanted to just meet us and have a chat. It was where I first met 04. Sincera was there. It was basically just playing Quake Champions offline for a weekend with the guys, having a chat with them, and they kind of just asked us the question there. Sync said, "How would you guys feel about commentating Quake?" And that was a really easy decision for us, because I'd always loved Quake, but I never had the chance to be involved in competitive Quake because I didn't have a PC until I went to university. And even then, I was competing in Mortal Kombat 9. For years, the only video game I was playing was Mortal Kombat, because I was a competitor and I wanted to be the best. So Quake Champions, the reason I was so excited, because it was finally a chance for me to just learn how to play Quake properly, beyond playing it on the N64 as a kid and loving it, but always wanting more, to actually learning how to play Quake properly. There was such a dry spell between then and Champions. The only way to play it would be Quake Live, but it was very hard to get into Quake Live if you were a complete newcomer. It was very, very daunting and difficult to get involved. So I would just watch QuakeCon and lurk. I would lurk streams and be like, "Man, this is sick," but I'll never be able to get into it. And then Quake Champions was finally an opening. So when they asked us the question, "Do you want to commentate Quake?" or "How would you feel to commentate Quake?" It was a very quick hell yeah. and it kind of that was it. That was the start of it. We started doing Quake World Championship together, back when Mustard and I were a duo back then. And then it helped grow me as a separate commentator when I had the chance to commentate with, DDK and Zoot. It was great. It was really great watching. I went from watching Zoot on streams and being like, man, this Zoot guy is sick, to actually, commentating with him years later as something I never thought would happen. And I'll always be grateful that I had the chance. But it all stems from Doom. And I owe a lot to Doom. That was my introduction to id Software on a competitive sense. And still going, thankfully.
So how did you learn to cast Quake Champions? Because it is very different, like, to a fighting game. Like, with the fact that you don't see the two perspectives at the same time, with the fact that the maps differ quite a lot. With, well, that's like the whole aim aspect. Yeah, like there are a lot of differences between an FPS and a fighting game. So how did you adapt to this as a caster?
Quake was a good experience for me. And it still is, because it teaches me how to do more, I guess, traditional commentary, where, the traditional esports commentary is you have a play-by-play commentator and you have a color commentator. And, you've got one person that's analysis and is a bit more soft-spoken and is a bit more well-articulated. And then you've got the play-by-play guy that's just hype all the time, calling the action, calling it as you see it, pointing out the obvious, basically. But entertaining the people, and making it sound fun and exciting to watch. And that's kind of like I'm not saying the play-by-play has no knowledge, because that's never the case. But, the two roles have always been there in esports commentary. Fighting games don't have that. You don't have time. The games are too fast. The rounds go on too fast. Especially when Mustard and I commentate. We have our own style, and we always have done. We almost take it in turns. Do you know what I mean? We have very similar styles, and we take it in turns to just, we've commentated so long, I can hear the full stops in his sentences. That's just the way we operate. That's that twin synergy, man. But that we realized with Quake, and we were very, very susceptible to the feedback. The Reddit, I'm not deluded, right? I know very well that I wasn't everyone's favorite, back in the day. And I'm probably not now. I know there are Quake fans out there that probably dislike the fact that I'm not very good at the game. I play it. It's the game I've played the most this year, because I finally got a machine that can run it properly. I still play and love Quake to bits, and I'll always love commentating it, and I love the community, and it has really felt like a family to me. A family outside of FGC is something I never thought would exist, but here we are, and I'm having a great time with it. But understandably, there are people out there that probably dislike my commentary because I'm not traditional. They probably dislike me because I'm not a top-level Quake player, because I've never entered a Quake tournament in my life, because if I did play a top player, I'd probably get my ass handed to me. But I'm the first person to admit that that's gonna happen, because I don't consider myself a top-level player of the game, and of course I don't, But I play to learn, and I play to absorb as much as I can, even if my hands can't do what I want my brain to do, because I know what I should be doing. That doesn't stop me from being able to absorb what's going on, so I can commentate it. And that's the same approach for if I were to play a fighting game that I didn't compete in. I love Tekken, but I'm not very good at Tekken when you compare me to high level. But I can watch Tekken and understand Tekken. Same thing with Dragon Ball Fighters. I play them all, and I love playing them all. But it's a different commentary style when you combine them all together. And it taught us, especially as a pair, actually, it taught us that commentating Quake Champions together, we needed to split the roles. We couldn't do our traditional fighting game commentary in Quake. Some people liked it, but some people thought that there was something missing. So we kind of went and revised things and did our best to change it up a little bit and really try and sort of like fit those molds just a little bit better. It's changed since then. Mustard doesn't commentate Quake anymore. He's pretty much Mortal Kombat all the way now, with the release of MK11. But now I'm solo commentating Quake Champions, and I get to work with the rest of the talent regularly. It has really helped me shape myself as a commentator, because Quake demanding the different roles that you play on commentary, it's been a really useful experience. I'm super grateful for it. As a professional commentator, where this is my job, I always want to get better. I am my own biggest critic. Quake especially. Quake is the game that no one judges me harder than myself when it comes to Quake Champions. I've always felt a little bit of an inferiority complex when it comes to it, because I'm aware that I'm not a competitive player, and it's very rare for me to actually commentate a game that I'm not a really high level player in. You know, I spent ages being a top level Mortal Kombat player, moving into commentary. Even when I commentated, I got top 8 at Evo one year as a competitor. At a tournament with 1.2 thousand people, I got 5th place. And I was commentating at the time. That was my first major tournament for MKX. So you can understand that playing a game that I wasn't a top level player in made me feel pretty uncomfortable. And it's taken a long time to kind of like shake that feeling off and just go into it as a commentator only. But yeah, it's been an interesting experience for me, that's for sure.
So regarding what you said with the community, what I find quite interesting is I remember you posting on Twitter like a while ago. I'm not sure, like maybe you were doing DreamHack Tour or something. That like you had received some criticism around the fact that you're a very hype caster, and that some people didn't like this whole hype aspect. And it's true that when I go back to like some older tournaments with like casters such as Too Good, like they're really not in this whole hype aspect. They're like much more calm, you know, like much more analysis as vision of casting. So what do you think of this question? Because like that is a criticism that we see often on the subreddit. People are like man, like I miss like the old casters like DDK Too Good and like, you know, other people from like back in the Quake Live days. So what is your take on this whole hype aspect?
So my take is that those people are completely within their right to feel that way. I've never have and I never will go after those people because I always have a great respect for the classic Quake commentators because their knowledge trumps mine tenfold because they crafted themselves Quake and that was their introduction and that was where they started. So they have that really high level competitors mindset, and that's something that I'm building on, but very gradually. Because I'm just simply I'm not as good at FPS as DDK is, you know, and that's just the way it is. So I do what I can to kind of learn gradually. But my commentary style, it is who I am, and I think that is something though that the reason I think the reason I get asked to do a lot of events is because id and Bethesda. And you know, I get told a lot of, on the contrary as well, I get told a lot of time by people at the events, the people at the shows, that they really enjoy my hype style of commentary. And I can assure you 100% that one of the critiques I'd seen is that it's fake hype. It's definitely not. Go and watch me commentate any fighting game, and you'll realize where I'm coming from. If I react the way I do to what I see. I react the same way with or without a microphone on my head. Like that's just the way I react to gameplay. I get excited about it and I get into it, especially if you know you've got the game audio and you can hear it and it's like you're really pumped and the adrenaline's going because there's a sick match going on and it's really close. You know, you feel the tension, and my tension comes out as excitement, and it always has done. And it's the fighting game guy in me. It really is. That's just the way I am. And I can be analytical as well, and I can sit here and talk about gameplay, and I can be much more relaxed. But when the time comes to get excited, I can't help it. Genuinely, it's not been a problem yet. I've not been. If I ever get sat down one day and they go, Ryan, you got to stop screaming into the mic, then I'll make adjustments. But it's that bridge hasn't come to me yet. You know, so it's one of those things where like I understand 100% where people are coming from, where they say that they miss analysis all the time, and they miss the I guess the quiet commentary, and they miss like the super chill casual stuff. Not necessarily casual, but you know what I mean, like that kind of like more casual conversation tone. That's a style that has been around for a long time. People like Zoot still provide that for sure. The rare time we can get DDK back, you know, it's like he never left when you hear him commentate Quake Champions, and it's a style I love and have a lot of respect for, but it's not me. And if people dislike it, that's their opinion. They're entitled to it. No one has to like me. I'm, you know, that I have a style, and that's the way I commentate, you know, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, regarding Sacrifice, I wanted to ask you about this because like Sacrifice was such a shit show. I mean, like, you know, let's be honest, like, and it was super difficult to follow. Like, I mean, I had a good understanding of what the game mode consisted of, but like following it watching tournaments of it, it was so complicated. So how was it? Because you and Master casted a lot of Sacrifice. So
so Sacrifice is actually Sacrifice was my favorite game mode to commentate because it was speed. I love fast games. I love fast matches. I love the exciting gameplay of just non-stop. That's just, again, that's just my background. And there's definitely a thing where people had said they really struggled to keep up with Sacrifice back in the day. And Mustard and I didn't really have that problem because we're just used to it. We're used to lightning fast rounds where there's just non-stop action. But our commentary style of taking it in turns to just maintain this level and, taking after one another and throwing over and taking it and, throwing over it and taking it, almost like if anyone's from the UK, the Chuckle Brothers, to me, to you, to me, to you. That's pretty much our style. I will always believe that I think it fits Sacrifice very well. But that's the reason we kept getting put on the higher profile Sacrifice matches because the teams really liked our style for that mode. I actually liked playing it. I liked watching it a lot. It was very, very exciting, but it was hard to follow for a lot of people. It just didn't have the spectator features that it should have. Like my biggest gripe with Sacrifice was that there was no moment of finale. There was no grand finish in a round. If you weren't spectating, like, if there was a fight that wasn't going on near the obelisk for whatever reason, and it ticked over up the top, sometimes you would almost miss that the round is over because there is no obelisk sacrifice on the screen. There's like no big impact that says this round is about to finish. Like this round is over. So many times I would hear a round finishes. And it was either one of us or someone else where it'd be like, oh, the round's over. Damn. Because the percentage just ticked over and that's it. You're commentating the percentages at the top, not the action. And that was my problem, is that there needed to be much more visual cue that the round had finished. Because to those that don't know what's going on and those who have never watched Quake before, they're like, I have no way of knowing whether this round is going to end or not. You have to know to look at the percentages. But if you're looking at the percentages up top, you're not looking at the rest of the action. So that's not very exciting to watch, is it? So, that was my issue with Sacrifice. I loved commentating it, and I thought it was actually a really sick mode. But it suffered from very subpar spectator features, in my opinion.
Are there any other things that you think could help? Like if CTF becomes the competitive team game mode, which is the idea for Quake Champions, and even though we don't have any information regarding Quake Champions esports future, if it has one, well, it will be centered around CTF. That's for sure. That's what I think.
I assume so. I think so. I mean, I don't see them putting all this effort into CTF for it to just be a throwaway mode. I think it's going to be the team mode of this year for sure. I reckon it's probably CTF and Duel, isn't it? Is my guess.
That's what I would also guess. What do you think also could help CTF succeed? And do you think CTF could ever become more successful or at least as successful as Duel? Because for example, if you look in 2018, the team game mode for esports that we had was 2v2, but the 2v2 numbers never reached the level of Duel, and some people also were quite disappointed that QuakeCon was centered around 2v2. So 2v2 succeeded in a way regarding pros, because pros really seemed to like it. It was a respected game mode, which was really efficient with a good balance for the two. But people definitely didn't enjoy watching it as much as 2v2. As much as Duel. And yeah, when we look back at Sacrifice, which also pros probably liked it even more than 2v2, according to players like Dehang.
I'll never forget him saying that was his favorite mode.
Yeah. But on a spectator point of view, people didn't really enjoy because we couldn't really manage to. So yeah, what else do you think could help the CTF succeed in 2019?
I will be honest here. I haven't played much of CTF. Since CTF was added, I've always been the kind of person where I can't really jump into matchmaking by myself in team modes. I have to be in parties of people that you can chat to and communicate with. That's just always been something I've had trouble with. And because a lot of people that I normally play Quake with haven't really been playing it during the off season, it's actually been very hard for me to get hands-on experience with CTF. So from a player's perspective, I'm not entirely sure. I know they've made some changes. A concern I heard a lot of people say was it was too one-sided, but now there's like, you know, there's like something in place in the PTS where you can
there's
like,
a mercy limit now.
Yeah, there's a mercy limit. So when it comes to CTF as a game mode, I don't know. I'm jumping into it soon because I want to get stuck into it, especially now because I've very recently got a new machine, which is why I've been playing and streaming Quake again, because I've actually got a machine that can stream it. So I'm doing it, basically. I'm enjoying that. But I haven't played much of CTF because there's not been a lot of competitive push for it so far. So I've not really been getting stuck in. The moment we see these announcements made and I know what game mode I should put the most time into, then I will do it accordingly, pretty much. But I have faith that it's going to be shaped into something better. If they've already made a change, which we're seeing the community say, yes, thank God, it clearly means that it are listening. So I don't know. I think if they're making their plans for how their competitive year is going to go, and CTF is a big part of that, I think taking on community feedback is something they're probably going to prioritize. And if that's the case, then TCF is likely to become much better than it was on launch. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, actually, I feel like my opinion on it and what I see most people talk about on the subreddit, because I moderate the subreddit among other people, so I get to read a lot of the comments that they talk on it, which aren't always like the most polite. And yeah, there was a lot of CTF hype prior to the release, especially because it took a while to release it, and while it's released, many people weren't satisfied with it. And most of the problem isn't really the game mode itself, it's more just regarding the maps, because there is only one symmetrical map, which is Citadel, and the rest are more like, you know, TDM maps. So they're not really suited for the game mode, which is also something that Sacrifice kind of suffered from. So it creates imbalances between the two sides.
Always a preferred, I mean, especially when it was a new mode, Sacrifice had this issue where because it hadn't been out for very long, Sacrifice, so almost every map had a preferred side. And especially in like the first half of that game mode's life, it always kind of felt like every single map had, oh, well, they're on that side, so they're probably going to win. Unless a team managed to kind of snatch it away and maybe swap it over and get the side, and then they're going to win. I remember, I think Lockbox was a pretty bad offender of that back in the day. But it's a weird one. Like the concerns about CTF having no symmetrical maps, with the exception of Citadel, was like, well, it's if they're going in with a big competitive push and they've not announced anything, there's always the potential that there's going to be an update which introduces new maps for CTF as well. So I don't know. I guess I'm kind of holding fire, and I've been kind of on the sidelines here, kind of just watching it all happen. So there's always the potential that maybe they'll release a map or two when they announce a competitive plan. I say when. I'm confident they're going to plan. They're planning something this year. It makes sense. They're not just going to leave it to die. They're going to. I will assume they'll support it in some way. And if CTF is a part of that support, and again the complaints are we want more symmetrical maps, then there's the potential that we see an update that includes more. You know what I mean? So again, like on the entire subject of CTF and stuff like that, I'm kind of sitting on the sidelines and just paying attention. Do you know what I mean? That's basically just my standing here. I'm just watching it all happen.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, so also one thing, like going from fighting games into Quake as a caster standpoint, regarding the community, I imagine that the fighting game community is very different than the FPS community. So how was that for you, Daphne? Like, what did you learn regarding the Quake community and FPS community as a whole?
I learned that the FGC talks a lot more shit. That's the first thing I've noticed. I'll never forget, 04 challenged me to Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo, and we had the big match at DreamHack Winter, and I beat that ass. But we were talking so much smack before it, because John genuinely believed he would beat me at Street Fighter 2. He had no idea. I was like, John, I know you're a legend and all that, but I don't think you will have lost any video game as hard as you will lose Street Fighter to me, right? Like, let's just get that out of the way. But he genuinely thought he would win. He underestimated me massively. And there was a bit of a conversation. I hope he doesn't mind me name dropping him, but it was Ron. I'm sure it was Ron. We were at DreamHack after the match had happened, and he was like, "How did the match go?" And it was like, "Oh, it was 7-1, 7-1 to me." Granted, the only reason it was 7-1 is because I played with my food in one game, and I had to make it a little bit close, And Ron said to 0-4, he was like, "Why would you talk shit before?" And we're like, "Because that's what you do. Like, if it's 1v1 and you're setting up a grudge match, you don't wait until you win and then talk shit afterwards. You talk shit first, and then when you win, you talk even more. And that's the strat. That's the strategy." But I know that there's a lot of rivalries and stuff in Quake, but they tend to be a bit more reserved. It is all about the game, and that has its pros and cons. I definitely think that the setting up big matches, like money match culture and like the salty sweets, the amount of Quake players I've heard say like they actually really wish there was like some kind of salty sweet thing for Quake, where like you set up a couple of PCs in a hotel room and they just have like money matches or something, and it's all streamed and that. Or like where players get to settle a score offline or at least next to each other or something like that. It's just, I think, logistically way harder to do that than it is to set up one console and get two pads in or two sticks or whatever it is and have them play it out. But the similarities come from the grassroots, the community feel. Everyone knows everyone. Even if players have rivalries with each other, there is a lot of mutual respect because everyone has this kind of thing, this common love that they share, which is competing in Quake or Quake tournaments. And that's why they've all sent themselves out there. They're all at an event offline. They're all there because they want to be. I get the exact same feeling from fighting games, but fighting game tournaments tend to be a lot more like, I'm not really sure what word to use. Very, very, very intense, like there's much more of a sort of like air of calmness with Quake players at tournaments, especially crowds too. If you ever watch the videos, those large scale American tournaments are ridiculous. And go watch any video and those guys are like screaming, because they're supporting their boys. If a local boy is in a tournament and they're winning on stage, you're going to have the crowd screaming that person to win, and if they don't win, it's unfortunate. The crowd is devastated, and it's a common occurrence. But yeah, I think it's mostly just I guess like volume level, I suppose, is the biggest difference between FGC and Quake. But the passion's all the same.
Yeah, true. Yeah, as you were talking about with the fact of losing, it reminded me of something, which is something that we just like really unfortunate that we see sadly quite a lot, but especially in team games. It's when one player, part of the team, will underperform, like everyone will talk shit about him, and like like we even hear like sometimes like in the Overwatch League, for example, players like say on Twitter that they receive some death threats because they all have underperformed for a few games, and like that is something we don't really see. I feel like in 1v1 games, and I just came to realize this. So yeah, like. What do you think of this?
Well, I mean, that kind of abuse is never okay, is it? Like the moment someone's already trying their best, and if they have a bad game, the last thing they need is some internet warrior threatening to kill you. Like it's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous, and it's something that no one should ever have to deal with. Humans are trash sometimes, so we can all agree on that. 1v1 is different in that sense because it tends to be, and the biggest comparison I'll make to that, I always think, is Cypher. That Cypher has not been able to really, I guess, reach the top tournament level of Quake Champions, and that's, I think, impacted him quite a lot. You can tell that he is affected by every loss because he is a legend by all accounts. Cypher is a legend, and even though he has done well in some tournaments, he's not been like the absolute highest placing at a LAN, which is the standard he was set to. But Cypher has loads of fans, right? Loads of fans because of the legacy that he's created through years of success. And whenever Cypher loses, he's not getting people saying, "Man, you suck now. You're crap. Why did I ever support you?" Instead, he's getting loads of comments of people saying like, "Don't sweat it. Like we still believe in you. You did absolutely great. Just gun for hire next time. Don't give up. Like I see so much support, and it's justly so support, because that's always what a player needs. If a player is not doing as well as they feel they should be doing, they need your support then more than ever. And I do think that the Quake scene is much more prone to giving that support to a player rather than throwing them under the bus. And the person that throws them under the bus tends to get a lot of people talking in response to have some respect. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't need to be talking to someone like that. You want to be a little bit more of a decent human, I think. And I love that. I really like that when players underperform a little bit or do underperform by their own standards in Quake, they actually get a lot of support, because that's when they need it, and they do seem to get it. I pay attention to Twitter all the time, and that's always the dominant point that I see, and it is nice to see. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. So what else do you think could help people, like fans, have this more supportive and much more respectful approach to the teams that they like? Do you think there's like anything could be done to prevent like this very harmful and like unsafe approach to being a fan, with like all the death threats and all the abuse?
Part of me think that's just human nature. I don't know if you can fix it, really. I think you can ban those that are saying unforgivable stuff, and learn to maybe filter out the people that are saying stuff that just isn't productive. Criticism is fine. Constructive criticism is superb. But if someone's just saying you're shit, that doesn't accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. That's more than likely someone that doesn't like you anyway, and is just using this low point for you as an opportunity to hurt you. Yeah. It's if there's someone online and they dislike someone and something doesn't go right for that person they hate, they'll just use that as fuel to try and stick it in further and make them feel worse, because that person is trash. Like I've never got time for those kind of people. The kind of people that exist to try and make others feel bad and use bad points just as fuel to make yourself try and feel better, because you're making the person you don't like feel worse. You're a trash person if that's the way you carry yourself. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're saying that to someone on Overwatch League, you're probably going to say it to someone else you don't like as well. You'd say it to someone not involved in games, probably. If you don't like an actor, you'll probably say it. If you don't like a band or a musician or a football player or whatever, you'll probably do the same thing, because that's just the kind of person you are. I don't think it's something that can be remedied. I think it's just ignoring those kind of people, because they don't matter. Those people are nothing, and they will remain nothing. While the people they're hating on, that person's still in the Overwatch League. That person's still playing at a higher level than the hater will ever be able to achieve. The exceptions is when someone's giving criticism, but there is truth to their words. Like when they're saying something about you and they're being very blunt and harsh about it. But if what they're saying, they're still, as long as they're not insulting you and what they're saying still has a point, when it comes like genuinely, it's something you can learn from. If there is a little bit of criticism hidden away in that, you can still take from that. But it's the people that are completely not constructive at all, that just exist to hate. They're the ones that I think you just don't pay attention to, because they exist in every walk of life, not just games.
You've probably noticed, because like as a caster and as a previous competitive player on Mortal Kombat, and then as a caster and like a community content creator for Quake, what did you notice regarding the players in terms of skill? Like, for example, the differences between the skill of a competitive fighting game player and the skills of a competitive FPS player?
Almost identical. Top level players in both those games, they display what you're supposed to. And again, it's a comparison, isn't it? The comparison between Quake and fighting games that is ever present. It's top level Quake players. Top level Quake players are some of the greatest video game players I think I've ever seen. They just are. Like the amount of ridiculous shots that they can hit, the perfect movement, the perfect timing, like the game sense, like not even timing the pickups, but like timing all of the stuff you've got to pay attention to, and then realizing whether someone's going to have an ability back. This person's got X amount of time of a cooldown left, but wait a minute, there are some hourglasses on the map, and they've definitely picked those up. So now it's gone from 40 seconds to probably 30 seconds. Like that foresight is ridiculous. Like the greatest Quake players in the world, like Rafa, the Razies as well. Razies has become so ridiculously good over his career of Quake Champions. it's just the knowledge is some of the most impressive stuff I've ever experienced. But still, it's kind of like, whereas fighting games, the knowledge is always there. It's very, very, very heavily built on reactions and being able to, like, you know, the crazy high stress of, you know, really mix up heavy characters, like playing Dragon Ball Fighters, and you're having to defend in Dragon Ball Fighters, and someone's throwing all of this crap on you, like there's stuff flying at you from everywhere, and you've got to try and block all of it, because if you get hit, you're probably dead, and you're going to lose a character. And you've gone from 3 characters to 2 versus someone with 3 characters, you probably can't win anymore. You're outnumbered because you got hit one time in a crazy mix-up that was like an 8-way block, and you just guessed wrong. You know, that's a stressful situation as well. They all have, they're both like equally as impressive, but they have their own different things you have to pay attention to, because fighting games are varied in that way too. That some fighting games are more theory than execution, and some fighting games are more fast-paced, and there's not as much time to think. So it's hard to compare them sometimes, but I would always say that the top level of both games are equally as impressive. But Quake players are like, you know, watching Rafa play Duel is, you know, it's a treat, isn't it? And it's because you acknowledge that what you are looking at is the highest possible level of play than anyone else in the world. And you get the same satisfaction watching, like JDCR play Tekken, or Knee play Tekken, or, you know, those kind of like really top level players as well. You just appreciate that what you're watching is like the cream of the crop, and it doesn't get any better. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So also one common point with Quake Champions compared to common Quake, that is the fact that there is a meta, which is something that we didn't have before in previous Quake games, because like before everyone was the same character, everyone had the same stats, the same speed, the same hitbox, and now, like similar to fighting games, there is a meta in Quake Champions, and so that is something that I often think about and ask myself questions. It's like, to what extent is the meta followed? Like, for example, in fighting games, because in Quake Champions, whenever like a character was the best character, like say like for the time it was Sorlag, then it was probably like the Doomslayer, then Clutch, and like pretty much everyone played those characters. And, like, there were some exceptions, like for example, of course, famously the Hang at DreamHack Winter 2017, who won, like, well, one of the reasons because he had the guts to play Clutch, despite this character never being meta at the time. And is this something like similar in fighting games? Is it like, is there also like this trend where basically like this is currently like the best character, everyone plays it? Or do you feel like maybe fighting games, competitive players are like a bit more bold regarding their picks, regardless of the meta?
It is identical. It is completely identical. Because, I mean, think of it this way. Every time a new patch comes about, Quake has a new tier list, right? There is a champion tier list in Quake, and you could easily make a champion tier list for each patch. There are best champions and worst champions, and they have order of use. And you've got S tier that goes all the way down to C or D, or however many characters are in the game, and what the difference in their effectiveness is. So if Quake Champions had a tier list, you would notice that a lot of pros and casual players alike follow that tier list, and they avoid the worst characters and they play the best characters. In fighting games, there is always a tier list, and players, 95% of players, will follow that tier list. They will stick to the best characters, and they will try and ignore the worst characters. You get differences in fighting games, though. The difference in games, like if you were to compare, let's compare Injustice 2 to Tekken 7. Tekken 7 is pretty much the most balanced fighting game out there right now. Every single character in Tekken 7, I forget the roster off the top of my head. I think there's like 40 characters or something crazy. There's a lot of characters in Tekken. Every single one is tournament viable, because the mechanics of Tekken, every single character in the game can play Tekken, and they're not missing a tool that they need to be good. It's just some characters have tools that are a bit more useful than others. But the fundamental point is every character can play the same game, and they don't have these like big, like glaring weaknesses for the most part. Like for reference, the world champion of Tekken 7 won last year with Panda. It's like one of the worst characters in the game, but he won the tournament. He beat the world's best players with one of the worst characters in the game statistically, but he won all the same. Take it to a game like Injustice 2, which was a lot more lopsided in terms of matchups. Some characters just struggled so hard to beat other characters because of the way their tools were designed. You would have to go into a tournament playing a team of characters. You'd have a main character, and if that character had bad matchups, you'd play a second character to cover those bad matchups, and you had a team, and that's what you competed with. You would sometimes get brave players that were character loyalists, and they had more fun competing with their favorite character, and they didn't care as much about results, so they played their favorite, but they would suffer the matchup issues that the character weaknesses gave them. You know, if they played a character that lost to some characters really hard, and they found someone in tournament that played the character that beats theirs, they're instantly at a disadvantage because they don't play something that covers it. And that's just kind of the way some fighting games go. There is similarities there again, where there are top players that are meta changers, and they're not afraid to reinvent the wheel in that respect. Dahang, I will always say, is the biggest advocate of that. You look at his clutch, look at his strog. Like if Rafa and Dahang think a combination works because they play the game at the highest level and they understand the game better than 99% of the other players around the world, they will be able to, if they think something works, they will ignore what the community says. And that happens in fighting games too. The same thing happened with Injustice 2, actually. There was a very set top tier list of characters that you should pick because they're the best. And then we have Sonic Fox winning the world championship of Injustice 2 with a bunch of pretty mid-tier characters that no one thought were that good. And because he is just the best Injustice 2 player, he trusted his own instincts and picked characters he thought would work. He won the world championship with those characters without needing a single top tier. He went with what he believed was right, and he was correct because he just had the foresight to do what he thought was the right thing. You get the same feeling watching Dahang and Rafa play together, because even though there is a set tier list, I'm not saying, you know, ignore the strong champions, because they play them too. But there comes a point where there are players that are so good, it's possible that the majority of the community might just be wrong about a champion or two. And it takes the cream of the crop to make that champion work because no one else was able to figure out what needed to be figured out to make that champion work. And that's what happened with Strog and Pika 100%. That was the biggest case for that. So yeah, it was a very long way of answering your question. But yeah, I agree 100%. They are identical in that regard as well.
Right. So also, like, one difference I see between FPS competitive players and fighting game players is the fact that I feel like fighting game players are much more like polyvalent. I'm not sure if that's even a word in English, sorry. But like, we often see competitive fight, like for example, there's Leffen. We see him doing like melee tournaments, ultimate tournaments. What else? Like fighters tournaments. And that's something we don't really see with fighting games. Like, for example, you don't see Overwatch players going to CSGO tournaments, or CSGO players going to Quake Champions tournaments. I feel like FPS players somewhat tend to really concentrate on one game, one franchise, and only play it. Whereas, like, yeah, like for example, Sonic Fox as well. Sonic Fox, of course, like plays.
He's the biggest example for that. For
yeah,
sure.
he plays so many different fighting games at the highest level at the same time, which is not something that we really see. Like, there's maybe like Fatality from back in the 2000s who played a bunch of FPSs, but like he is the exception, and like we haven't really had a Fatality since.
But the thing is, look at the legacy Fatality has, and how in high esteem people talk about Fatality, where they're like dominant player among multiple shooting games, one of the greatest legends of all time when it comes to esports, because he could play all these different shooting games and be a top level player in them. And that's what Fatality was able to do. He just did it years and years and years ago when he was like one of the first to do that. And that's one of the reasons it was so impressive, because no one was doing it at the time. And then here comes Fatality, and it's like, holy shit, this guy is dominating so many games. But it was impressive, and damn straight it was impressive. But that does exist in fighting games now too, and it did back then as well. You know, players like Justin Wong, you know, Daigo could play any Street Fighter and be a top level player. Justin Wong was, you know, the king of Marvel versus Capcom, but he could play Third Strike at a top level as well. You know, the famous Evo moment where Daigo parries Justin Wong. You know, they're the two players. They were gods back then, and they're gods now. It's one of those things where, like, I've seen a lot of remarks saying, like, well, you know, fighting games can't be that hard if someone can dominate multiple. If someone said to Fatality, FPS can't be that hard if you could dominate Quake and Painkiller, they would have been laughed out the room. And rightly so, you know, because it's a stupid thing to say. It really is, because fighting games have fundamentals. FPS have fundamentals. You know, you can take those skills across the board. If you're sick at one competitive FPS, like Painkiller or whatever, you could translate those skills a little bit to the 1v1 of, you know, Quake 4 at the time. I think there's a reason that he was so good at multiple of those games, because I didn't compete in either of those games by all means, but you can look at the way Fatality is playing those tournaments, and you know he's got those 1v1 FPS fundamentals, and he's translating those from game to game. The exact same thing happens when Sonic Fox, you know, plays Injustice 2, and then he'll go and play Dragon Ball Fighters, two ridiculously different games, and he'll win both those tournaments, you know, or get top 3 at least. I know Combo Breaker was in May last year. Sonic Fox entered 4 games. I think he entered 4 games. The lowest he placed was 3rd. He won Dragon Ball, 2nd place in MK9, 3rd in Injustice, I think it was. I think he got 2nd in Skullgirls, I think, as well. But my point is, the 4 games that he entered were drastically... MK9 does not play like Injustice, which doesn't play like Dragon Ball, which definitely doesn't play... Well, Dragon Ball and Skullgirls have the most similarities because they were versus games, team games. But they still weren't the same game. It was the fundamentals that allowed him to place that high in all those games. So it's like, yeah, it's... I think it's just that... And you know what it is as well? I also think that it's partly this culture of tournaments being under one roof. You know, if you're a professional Counter-Strike player, it's all you're going to play because it's all you have the chance to play. If you're a competitive Quake player, it's all you've got the chance to play because it's the only game at the tournament. The thing is, you have the chance at fighting game tournaments to enter multiple games because multiple tournaments are going on all around you. I will say, though, and this is coming from experience, it's much harder to do that too. That's why it's so impressive. To go to a tournament and play multiple games and place at least top 8 in multiple games is very impressive, because going into a tournament not being in the zone for one game alone can distract most players and make you not play your best. But, you know, can you imagine how it must feel? Like, to put it in context, this is exactly what it is. You go, let's say that you're playing Quake Champions and Apex Legends right now, and you go to a tournament for Quake, but you play Apex Legends, so you've entered Apex Legends as well. Okay, you sit down, you play an entire duel, and that, you know, lasts X amount of time, super last shot, last round, last bit of HP. You put every ounce of your brain power into winning one of the closest duels of your life. And you win it or you lose it, it doesn't matter. You are mentally drained. You've just finished this duel and it's over, and you're like, holy shit, that just took 5 years off my life. It was so stressful. And then right as you're finished, tournament admin taps you on the shoulder and says, right, go over there, you got to play Apex Legends now. Would you be able to play the best in both of those games if you're having to bounce around like that? It's very hard to do. It can be done if you're good enough, but the amount of mental stress it takes to bounce from game to game at the same event, I can't even begin to start explaining how difficult that is. I've once played in a tournament where I played Mortal Kombat X and Mortal Kombat 9 at the same time. They're both Mortal Kombat, but they played so different to each other, and my characters had different move inputs and stuff. Even that was stressful, let alone playing other games that aren't the same franchise, you know? So yeah, that whole culture of people that can place top in multiple tournaments, it's one of the most impressive things a competitive player can ever do. You know, and it's why Fatality is a legend, and it's why Sonic Fox is a legend in the making. It's why Leffen is held in such high esteem, because so many people just couldn't do that.
So also, like, fighting games are much more rely much more on sequels than FPS games do. Like, for example, in MOBAs, like, for example, League of Legends, it's been there for like, I don't know, half a decade or more than that. Same for Dota, CS:GO, like games that have been there. I don't like probably since 2012, 2013, like. Yeah, in MOBA and FPSs, we get games lasting a lot longer, whereas in fighting games very often, like, you know, we get sequels and then like the previous game doesn't, like, for example, once Mortal Kombat 11 releases, I imagine that's where all the esports scene will move on to, and then like which is what happens with Street Fighter as well. So what do you think explains this, and do you think that this will always be this way, or do you think that maybe, like, for example, if they release like Street Fighter and then it will be the esports title for like 5 years, or do you think it will always like stay with this sequel system?
Truly, I think it's a console thing. I think it's just the way console games go. I know they're on PC, but PC is never the primary focus. The tournaments and that are always done on PS4 most of the time, unless it's Xbox only, like Killer Instinct or something. I think it's just the way consoles are, and it's the way that the promotional period of a console game goes. You know, sales in their millions every few years, make a new game, sales in their millions again, rinse, repeat. It keeps going, keeps going. I mean, look at how often a new COD comes out, a new Battlefield, a new FIFA, a new, you know, racing game like Forza or something like that. New fighting games, they're no exception. If it's a console-based game, it has a much shorter lifespan where a new one comes out, but it feels a little bit like the old one, and you're simply moving on to new games that, you know, I've spoken to COD players before, and I could be wrong here. The ones I've spoken to might be incorrect. But when I say, like, you know, you have to sort of get used to playing a new COD every year, a lot of people are saying, well, it's not really new, you know, it's more of like a reskin. And they changed the mechanics a little bit. But if you're a competitive COD player and you've got those COD fundamentals, every time a new COD comes out, you know, you simply need to just adapt to the changes, and then you're well on your way again. That's the same thing with fighting games for the most part, really. You know, top Mortal Kombat X players who were top Mortal Kombat 9 players will probably be top MK11 players. The three games are different, but they still feel like Mortal Kombat. So all you need to do is simply, you know, learn the new game and learn the new set of rules, and you're going to be straight where you left off, basically. Yeah. I just think it's a console thing, honestly. I'd like to see these games last a little bit longer, particularly Mortal Kombat, actually. I think Injustice 2 kind of suffered this thing where it just wasn't as popular with the community as Mortal Kombat X was. So Injustice 2 kind of saw a slightly more stagnant second year where the community wasn't as into it and they didn't play it as much, which meant they didn't travel to tournaments for it. Because, you know, these players for fighting game scenes, they're self-funded. If you're not sponsored, you send yourself to every event, and it's an expensive ordeal. So, you know, there were players that probably weren't going to spend their own money to send themselves to an Injustice tournament. And the game, it wasn't dead by any means, but it was much smaller than any NRS game we'd seen before because they weren't as interested. But because, you know, that was the focus, the community was with Injustice 2, and that was all we had until MK11 got announced. And the moment Injustice 2 finished its year, everyone just went back to Mortal Kombat X to play it for fun, while we now wait for MK11, where everyone's going to move on, because Mortal Kombat is where the NRS, that's really the heart of the NetherRealm scene, is Mortal Kombat. But the point is, we had Injustice 2 for 2 years, and a bunch of the scene didn't really like the game as much as they did Mortal Kombat. So they had 2 years of not really having many tournaments to play in because Mortal Kombat was no longer being supported. And that's the problem with that, is that if someone doesn't like a game, they're almost stuck with it for 2 years until the one they like comes back. Whereas if a game is alive for longer, they can just really funnel in and dedicate, and that's their game. You know, they can play, and they know it's not going anywhere. There's a feeling of security, which I think must be nice if you're a competitive player, and you know that, you know, if you're on a fat wage and you're a top level player for Counter-Strike, and you know that Counter-Strike ain't going anywhere, you're pretty cushy. But if you're a console gamer and you compete in a game and you run the risk of just not gelling with the next one, you have to really make the most out of the time you have with the game you're good at, because a couple of years in, you're going to have to jump ship again. If you're playing for money, if you're playing for tournaments, that's it. You can play inside tournaments and stuff, but it will never be the same scale. And that's where the problem comes in. There's pros and cons to it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So also, one thing I was thinking of is the difference. Well, one of the main difference between the FPS games and the fighting games is, of course, the input system that is used. Because, well, of course, FPS games are played with mouse and keyboard, whereas fighting games are played with a controller. So, yeah, how does that change for you? And because, of course, you've played both. You've played a lot of Quake. You've played a lot of fighting games, even though you're probably like more competitive on fighting games. So, how does that impact the the player, the tournament, the game, the form of input that is used?
It's a funny one. I play with my keyboard on my lap, LAN style, even though I was never a LAN Quake player. But I play Quake with the keyboard on my lap because I play some fighting games on a fight stick, the kind of like portable stick where you have it on your lap and you play. The feeling of having something like that on my lap and being in that kind of like that, having that kind of posture is just that's what I've been used to. I don't compete on stick for all games. If I play Mortal Kombat, I play on a pad. If it's the only games I play on stick are like really old school fighting games where the only way I see them playable is probably on an arcade machine where all you have is stick. So I play Street Fighter Third Strike on stick, EX2 Plus on stick, because that you have to. The only way you can play them is on stick. But having something on my lap is what I find comfortable. So I feel way better playing Quake with the keyboard on my lap rather than on a desk. But what freaks out a lot of people is my jump for every FPS has always been space, and it still is space. Because for me, the rhythm of my thumb jumping, getting in the rhythm of pressing a button to do an important motion, and getting in that motion where my thumb presses down and I've got the rhythm going, again, that's, for me, it sounds really weird, and I know there's probably a lot of people that probably won't get it, but that's my comfort zone. I tried so hard to do mouse jump, and I can't do it. My brain doesn't function that way. It's so much more comfortable for me as a player who is used to sitting on my desk and having a stick where I play like this, and I press some of my buttons with my thumb when I play on stick fighting games. It's the same thing when I try and jump when I'm playing Quake. My thumb being an important button that I get in the rhythm for, and holding it when necessary, that's just personal preference. Like any control scheme there is, it's personal preference. If it works for you, you do it. There are players out there, you talk about different controls. There are players out there that play on converters in the fighting game scene for pads that came out years ago. An Evo champion, Luffy, a French player who won Street Fighter 4 one year, to this day plays on a PlayStation 1 pad. And that's always been his favorite pad, and he's never changed. And the whole way, he plays Street Fighter 5 now on a PS1 pad, on PS4. Like, that's how he does. There was a player that got top 8 in a Guilty Gear tournament by playing on a steering wheel. Genuinely a steering wheel. Because it has a D-pad and buttons. Like, someone's played a tournament with a Rock Band guitar. Like, what the hell's going on here? That's just what they do. Like, if you find it comfortable, then all the power to you, is what I say. But adapting from game to game and having different controls, it's just like learning the game itself. You just get used to it.
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny, like the more we talk, the more ideas I have. Like usually my interviews aren't that long, to be honest. But
no worries, man.
Oh yeah,
I get paid to talk. I could talk all day.
That's amazing. So also, one thing I wanted to ask you is regarding the evolution of the meta, especially regarding the fact of adding content, because that's what basically every esports does now. That's what Overwatch does. That's what fighting games do. That's even like CS:GO to a certain extent, adding new maps, adding new weapons. The meta is never stable. It always evolves. And so with fighting games, you always need to learn your matchups. Like you've got your main character, and then you need to learn how to play against character X and character Y. And with the addition of new characters and with game rosters becoming more and more, do you feel like maybe like we'll come to a point where there are like too many characters in the game? Like the game that got me wondering is Smash Ultimate, which has like I don't know, like what 60, 70 characters? I don't know. Like,
everybody is here.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and there comes a point where do you feel like maybe there could be too many characters to a game where like there's just like not possible learning every matchups?
This is where it gets very complicated, I think, because ultimately, that was no pun intended, actually. If you're playing Smash and you have that many characters, the one thing you can't forget is that almost with the exception of the new characters, a lot of those characters are legacy. So if they were in Smash for Wii U, they will play very similar. They might have some changes here and there, but a bunch of the characters, a lot of people that played Ultimate played Smash for Wii U, or they played Brawl, or they played Melee. And a lot of those characters, with the exception of Melee, because it was very different, characters, they've got the same moves, a lot of the same buttons do the same things. Their properties might be slightly different, but fundamentally it's the same character. And they're simply put in Ultimate with minor changes, and that's it. So if you know how to fight, I'm just spitballing here, I guess, but if you know how to play against Captain Falcon in Smash for Wii U, you probably know a base level of how to fight Captain Falcon in Ultimate, because they're similar characters. So when games have that many characters, there's probably a lot of legacy there. So you will probably know what you're doing already. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of things to learn, which is why playing the same character in that kind of setting is preferred. Because there's a lot of matchups to learn. And if you're going to learn all these matchups with multiple characters, it's just going to take forever. And you're never going to be able to thrive with a character pick unless you know every matchup with everyone. Yeah. So that's the difficulty. I think that's why games that have lots of options now introduce bans and stuff like that. Like even Quake, I think one of the reasons they didn't have bans originally is because there just weren't enough champions. And now even Quake is starting to add more. The presence of the ban is becoming more prominent because they're starting to be a little bit more champions, and players are being kind of forced to learn more champions to play if they want to succeed. So I don't know. I think as someone who has played games that have lots of characters, I don't mind it. It's just part of the experience, really. Part of the game is learning all the matchups. But I definitely understand that it's intimidating for some new people to learn a game that has like 40 characters, and it's like, oh great, that's like, I don't have time for that. It kind of goes back to the I would learn it, but I just don't have time to learn all the matchups. It's definitely something I think that can put players off, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, you were talking about bans, and I think like most of the fighting games, from what I've seen, don't have a system of banning characters.
They do not.
And I feel like what many people have complained about with the ban system in Quake Champions is that it prevents characters from playing their mains, for playing the characters that they like playing the most, that they're better with. Like, for example...
Pour one out for my boy Vu, man.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You can't go to a tournament without Anarchy being banned. Like, I know he's single-handedly, I think, hates the ban the most because he just can't play Anarchy.
Exactly. So yeah, that is your problem. Like from a spectator point of view, it is a big shame. Yeah, it is a big shame not seeing Vu play Anarchy. It is a shame not seeing like Toxic play Slash, not playing like Radiant Clutch. And see, what do you think of this? Like, to what extent do you think the spectator aspect of seeing people playing their main characters should be considered, facing the other idea of making the game probably more balanced by having a ban system?
The ban system has pros and cons, as it does in every game. If the main way the ban was intended, I think, is if there is this be-all, end-all broken champion that everyone uses, you can now just ban it, and it makes the match a bit more interesting, how it's not going to be so hell-bent on the crazy top tiers. And that's why modern times Clutch was banned so much, because no one wants to deal with Clutch. So, you remove Clutch from play, because if the bans weren't there, everyone would just play Clutch, and it would be boring. I'll never forget, one of the metas, I think it was after the Quake World Championships, but the meta of Anarchy and Sorlag every game. Like, it was just... Anarchy and Sorlag were almost 100%. You saw them every goddamn time, and it got so boring. So if the pros and cons of the bans come into being able to remove stale champions that you would otherwise see every single time, but in some ways it just creates a shift of power, because if you know that the best champion's going to get removed, well, is there a second best champion that now we see every time? Like, does that fix the issue of us now? Well, we don't see, if you can only ban one champion a game, well, all right, we wouldn't have seen Sorlag anymore, but we'd have seen Anarchy every game. Do we think that's better than seeing them both and having just one? Or is there now going to be a new champion? Is it now going to be Anarchy and Doom every time for free, and then some random other pick? So that's one of the potential issues, is that it doesn't fix the problem. It just changes it to someone else who might, dare I say, be more boring to watch. And then it also introduces the issue of, people that the rare occasion a player tries to break meta, or at least go with what they find more comfortable, they can't even be creative anymore because they get like personally banned out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the second the ban system went into place, it felt like Vu could no longer put his own trademark on the game anymore because his main champion is taken out of play.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to watch Vu because they want to watch his Anarchy because he's had the best Anarchy in the business. Now we can't even see it because it gets banned every time. But if I was against Vu, I'd ban it because I don't want to deal with that. Like, it would be really hard to fight. So of course it's banned, but the fact it's banned, he hasn't got an alternative. Mm-hmm. And he has to, his favorite pick is gone. So it's but then you weigh it versus what's more important, right? Having those issues or making sure that we don't see clutch every game at DreamHack Winter, you know? Like, what do we, as viewers, what would we rather watch? And I think that's where the discussions come in, where it's like, would we rather see the same champions every game with no scope for variety? Because that's just, these are the three best, no exceptions. Or do we have the potential issues the ban brings, while at the same time, now there is a potential that maybe we can get some more champion variety? I think that's where people were divided, I think.
Yeah. All right, so for my final topic, I want to ask you regarding Doom Eternal. So what do you expect from this game? What do you wish to see?
I want so I kind of almost feel like I've already got my wish. I'm actually looking forward to Doom Eternal much more of a multiplayer standpoint than a single player standpoint. I'm gonna do the campaign and all that, like, who isn't? But I'm actually really hyped for the multiplayer. I want spectator features because I would love to get involved in community activity. I don't foresee Doom Eternal getting like an esports push because they're probably going to continue to support Quake as their FPS for that kind of that market. But I really hope there's a spectator client, because either I'll try and get some stuff on the go, or if Jahar is doing something, I really, really want to get involved in community stuff for Doom Eternal, because that's what I wanted to do with Doom 4 but couldn't, because there was no spectator. But the main thing I wanted was the same kind of like shooting and weapon play, and you know the sort of like the quick switch, the meta of Doom 4 being heavily built around loadouts and quick switching, where you take two weapons that worked really well together and you would quick switch. You know, for example, taking two shotguns was faster to shoot shotgun, swap shoot, swap shoot, swap shoot than it would be to shoot pump, shoot pump. So like the meta was, you know, your loadout would be a set combination existing to burst someone down as fast as possible. If you had two shotguns where you go shotgun swap, shotgun melee, that person was probably dead. Even with a big stack. So that was very interesting, and it actually made it very fast paced and very fun. The problem I had with Doom 4's multiplayer was that the movement wasn't that good. Granted, the maps worked around it. The maps were very close quarters, so the lacking movement wasn't as bad. They introduced some more equipment as well, like the thrusters for your legs, where you could move a lot faster. Personal teleporter was good. So there were ways to move faster, but you sacrificed burst damage for faster movement. But that said, a lot of the maps were close quarters, really, really close quarters actually. So you didn't feel as slow because you weren't really out in the open. You were always in corridors, which made the quick swap better, because you had to be super on your toes, because if someone comes around a corner, you got to be like bam, shoot, bam, melee, dead. Otherwise, he's probably going to kill you, because if he's doing the same thing, you got to perfect that execution, So all I wanted was better movement, and because of things like we've not seen the multiplayer, but in the gameplay we've seen so far, Doomslayer has a dash, he's got a grappling hook. That alone, we've got better movement instantly. I'm wondering if we'll have that in Eternal. I'm wondering if they bring the equipment back and the ability to dash and dodge. I wonder if that's going to be tied to an ability. Maybe it's going to be universal movement. If it's going to be universal movement, I foresee slightly larger maps, because if you can now move a lot faster, I'm going to assume that the maps aren't going to be so point blank as they were in Doom 4. So I'm stupidly excited. I have to admit, I'm really pumped for it. Doom Eternal is all I wanted was Mortal Kombat 11 announcement and Doom Eternal announcement. I've got both, which means that my year can hopefully be Mortal Kombat, Doom, and Quake. That's I couldn't ask for a better year. Do you know what I mean? I've got my 3 favorite games. I don't need anything else. I can play other games and still chill with them for fun. Tekken 7 is the most popular. Mustard and I run a fighting game local in our city. So we have like a local session every couple of weeks. We rent out some space at a bar in town, and there's about 20 of us every time come down and play fighting games all night with some drinks and that. I play Tekken all the time because that's the most popular game there, yeah. But from like a super competitive perspective, I really want it to be Mortal Kombat, Doom Eternal, and Quake. Like that's the perfect trio for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So just real quickly, like on the weapon of Doom, don't you feel like it was a bit unfortunate that there was only 2 weapons? Like, I mean, that's what I thought as a player, like, with all this arsenal of awesome weapons and having, like, being limited to 2, whereas, like, in the solo, you can have, like, all the, I don't know, 8 weapons available at the same time. I'm not even sure how many weapons there are, but yeah, I feel like it was a bit of a shame for that the multiplayer only had 2, and it kind of felt like it was something that they had to do because the console port, in a way. I don't know. What do you think of this?
If the quick switching meta wasn't so fun, I would dislike that. But because the quick switching meta was so fun, I'm fine with it. Okay. Like, because it still felt, it's weird, but it's weird to say, but because the quick swap and the aggressive reactionary, like, point blank play was there, it still felt like Doom, even though you didn't have multiple weapons. And that's crazy to say. I know that Doom is always historically about having loads of weapons and just shooting the shit out of everything. But Doom, to me, also feels very aggressive, visceral, intense, like super, super twitchy. That's also what Doom feels like to me. And because the quick swap was so important, and it was heavily built around being in these corridors and these small spaces where you see someone, you have to eliminate them as fast as possible, or you've got to make sure you're timing the demon rune, so when the demon rune's about to appear, because the trick was the demon rune was set locations around each map. The game would warn you. It used to be 5 seconds, it became 10 when they changed it. But even before 10 seconds started, you could actually look at those locations. And when you're timing it on the map, you would look around, and one of those locations would start to gradually open. Like the hell UI or graphics or whatever you'd call it would start to open on the floor before the timer started. So a coordinated team, or even you in free-for-all, you'd kind of scout the map and look for those locations. When you started to see it open up, you'd communicate it with your team, and then you'd control that part of the map. So when the demon rune spawns, you're already standing on top of it and making sure you're fighting people off. You take the demon, you smash shit up, but it opens up, the meta on the other side, where once the demon rune is there, you can respawn with a different rune that, there's a rune you can take where you can see the demon outlined on the map. So you take that when you're on the flip side and try and fight back for it. But because it was so constantly, like, the fights were never ending, it still felt like Doom to me, even with 2 weapons, because it was so intense. It just didn't feel like anything else, even with that drawback of not having, like, crazy weapons to choose from.
Yeah. So now, before we finish this interview, do you have any, like, final words, any people you like to thank, some shout outs?
I just want to shout outs to all the communities, man. Like, genuinely, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with Quake Champions for as long as I have. I'll continue to play it and I'll continue to love it. It's been a great time so far, working with all the folks at id and Bethesda and my peers, Zoot, Jahar, and co. Everyone's been super, super sick. The growth of, like, other commentators like 40 and Flea, those guys have come a long way in a short space of time. Flea's stream is doing really well. I'm enjoying, like, Flea's content, and I'm just grateful for the opportunities I've had, and hopefully we'll continue to have. We'll see what the future brings. You'll be seeing me around a lot for Mortal Kombat. You'll be seeing me all over the place, I'm sure, from a content standpoint, or I'll try and do as many tournaments as I can. And yeah, keep your eyes peeled for Doom Eternal as well, because I'm gonna be all over that. But also, man, thanks for your time. It's been really kind of fun sitting here and having a bit of a recap and chatting over sort of like different bits of history, and that's been a lot of fun.